All right, we're live.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael here at the MacMillan Space Centre, and welcome back to another one of our weekly Q&A sessions. Normally, I'm just hanging out with our astronomer, Rachel. You're my astronomer, Rachel. And it's usually just us gabbing here 2 o'clock every Thursday, but this week, we have a very special guest to talk to us about rockets, and that is the Canadian Space Agency astronaut candidate, Jeremy Hansen. Hey, Jeremy, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today. I'm glad to join the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So how are you feeling, Jeremy? Like, how is your life as an astronaut candidate? How's it changed, in this new pandemic world, and the work that hopefully you'll be going up into space? We haven't got there yet, but how has your life been impacted?
Yeah, it's been a pretty big change. I've primarily been isolated at my home in Houston with my family. I work mostly from home. The Johnson Space Center here in Houston is still open for essential tasks. So like if there's some training you have to do on site, you can go in for that. We wear masks, we socially distance at work. But if you can do it from home, you do it from home. And that's been my life now since we've all been isolated. It's very different. It's a big challenge. I think it's hard on all of us. I feel, very fortunate, but I know for a lot of people, it's really, really difficult, and I definitely feel for them.
Awesome. So for everyone out there on YouTube, we're going to have an opportunity to ask some questions. Jeremy's going to give us a presentation on this week's theme, which I'm sure you guessed by now is all about rockets. So put those questions in the YouTube for all of you watching out there on Telus Optic. Hopefully next week you can join us on YouTube, but hello to everyone out there. Please put your questions, and please be respectful as well as we are live here on YouTube. Put those questions for Jeremy or Rachel. We can get into anything. We might go a little bit over just because we want to get to everyone's questions. So we might go a little bit past our half-hour mark, but definitely no longer than the 45-minute mark. All right, let's get to it, Jeremy. Tell us all about rockets.
Yeah, all right. Let me share a screen here, and hopefully now you're seeing an image of the International Space Station. And I just wanted to frame, I'm gonna start showing you some of the different rockets right now that humans can use to get to the International Space Station, or they will be able to use in the very near future. And so the International Space Station orbits our Earth in something we call low Earth orbit, so about 400 kilometers above the surface. And so for a long time now, we've been using the Russian Soyuz rocket to get astronauts to and from the International Space Station. And if you look at this rocket, I'm going to kind of use it as our comparison for all the other rockets I'm going to teach you just a little bit about today. So the Soyuz rocket is about just under 50 meters tall, and it weighs about 300,000 kilograms. So it's pretty heavy, and it can carry just over 8,000 kilograms to space, or to low Earth orbit, up to where the International Space Station is. And this is a picture of my colleague, David Saint-Jacques, who got back from the space station about a year ago. He lived up there for 6 months, and this is his rocket that he flew to the space station on. So that's the Russian Soyuz. And then this is what it looks like inside there. So there's David on the far side of this image, and there are 3 astronauts crammed into that Soyuz capsule. And this is how they get to and from the space station. Now, recently, you might have been part of the excitement or watched some of the excitement. We started launching humans on a new rocket for the first time ever, the SpaceX Falcon 9. So pretty cool rocket. Now, Falcon 9 has been flying for many years. In fact, it launched, this picture here is not humans. This is a launch of a satellite, Canadian satellite system called RadarSat Constellation, a really cool satellite constellation that can see through clouds, see all of planet Earth, and can look at things like ice, moisture levels, good for farming, good for disaster management, good for defense of our country, all sorts of neat purposes. But Falcon 9 can do the work of about 3 Soyuz rockets. So it's about 70 meters tall, it weighs about 550,000 kilograms, and it can carry about 3 times as much as a Soyuz rocket can to space. And then this is what it looked like just a few weeks ago when we launched 2 American astronauts for the first time on this rocket. really exciting day to be launching people out of North America again on Falcon 9s. And this is what it looks like in that rocket. Now, it was designed for NASA by SpaceX to carry 4 astronauts, but it's actually big enough in there to carry 7 astronauts in theory. So someday you may see 7 people going to space on these Falcon 9 rockets. And this is what it looked like when it got to space and it was approaching the International Space Station just before it docked. And it's still up there right now. So while you and I are chatting, there are 5 human beings on board the International Space Station. And 3 of them are American and 2 of them are Russian right now. And of course, the International Space Station is just that. It's an international cooperation. Canada is part of it, the US and Russia, European Space Agency, which is many European nations are involved, and then Japan as well. And we all work together to do some really cool stuff in space. Now, one of the cool things about Falcon 9 is you can actually stick 3 of them together and make what's called a Falcon Heavy. And so a Falcon Heavy is the same height as a Falcon 9, but it weighs a whole bunch more, about 3 times as much. So it can do the work of 8 Soyuz rockets. So it can deliver about 64,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit. And I just want to give you a sense of how big these rockets are. So imagine one of these, there's 3 of these Falcon 9s strapped together. Well, this is what they look like when they're being processed. And that's a human being right underneath. So it is a big rocket. I think it's like 9 stories tall, something like that. And so you strap the 3 of them together and then you launch it to space.
9, 8, side booster ignition. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
So rocket launches are cool, but there's only one thing better than a rocket launch, and that's a rocket landing. And that is a really cool technology that has just come into being in the last decade, less than a decade. SpaceX has been landing their rockets and reusing them. So this is not a picture of rockets blasting off. This is a picture of the 2 side boosters landing after that rocket you just saw launched. So they go up, they use up almost all their fuel, and then they turn around and come back and land. And this is what it looks like. So this is the landing.
And that landing burn has started.
Both boosters looking to be on track towards their respective landing zones. Landing burns have started. Side boosters landing legs are deployed.
I gotta tell you, I just think that's the coolest thing. And I was really fortunate to be there for that launch and to see those boosters come back and land. And it is one of the coolest things I have ever seen. Just so remarkable. So this is kind of a neat picture that shows you what has to happen for one of those boosters to actually come back and land. And so what you see here is a time-lapse photo of the Falcon rocket blasting off. And then here, the main part of that rocket, what we call the Falcon 9, the first stage has done its work, and the second stage is going to light an engine and keep going to orbit. That's this line you see here. So that it looks like it's going down, but it's actually going into Earth orbit. It's actually going around the Earth. But the part that is going to come back and be reused again actually is going about Mach 5 times the speed of sound. So the very first thing it has to do is a big burn to reposition it and to slow it down to about Mach 2. And it actually will end up going up higher during that burn. And then it will fall back down towards the Earth where it wants to land. In this case, it's going to land out here on a barge, on basically a ship, a landing pad in the ocean. But as it's falling back down, it actually picks up speed again. So by the time it's about to hit the Earth's atmosphere, it's close to Mach 4, which is too fast. It'll burn up. So it has to slow down. So that's what this line is here. This is a burn to slow it down to about Mach 2 again. And then it can enter the Earth's atmosphere. And during that time, it keeps slowing down because the air is slowing it down. And then just before it lands, it starts firing its engines. And that's what you just saw in that video. And then it lands on, in this case, a barge. I just think that's a really fascinating technology. And it's new technologies like this that are making getting to space cheaper, which means we'll be doing more space in the future. Here's another rocket that we're using right now. We're going to be sending humans to the International Space Station on it very soon, probably sometime within a year. This is the Atlas V rocket, which carries the Boeing Starliner capsule on top of it. And the Atlas V rocket can do the work of about 2.5 Soyuzes. So it's a big rocket as well. So there's the capsule sitting on top. That's what a drawing of it looks like going to space. And we did a test flight recently with no humans on board. And this is what the capsule looked like after it landed under parachutes in the desert. So again, we'll be flying people on that soon. And then here's some other really cool technologies. This one's called Dream Chaser. It's being built right now to take cargo, but you can see it has windows. And so someday it is going to be taking people to space. This one, we just saw that NASA signed an agreement with Virgin Galactic just this week, basically, or last week, to start looking at how to use this technology to get humans into space. Right now, it's being built to take people on rides up into space, but not orbital. So that means they fly up into space and then they fall back down, and you get to be in space and floating around for maybe like 14, 15 minutes, something like that. And this is kind of cool. So it's got a mothership that looks like this that carries that middle part up into space or up to the edge of the atmosphere. And then you fire that rocket and you fly up into space in this part and then glide back down and land again. So neat things coming. Another company that's doing the same thing is Blue Origin. Blue Origin is supposed to start passenger flights very soon. This is a similar concept. It flies up into space and then falls back down. And all of this rocket is also reusable, but they're building a bigger version, a really big version that is supposed to be able to, let's see, the New Glenn, it's about 100 meters tall, and it can do the work of 5.5 Soyuz rockets. So it's a pretty neat rocket, and it will be an orbital rocket, and it'll be reusable. All right, we're getting to the end of our rockets here. So we've been talking mostly about getting to the International Space Station, but if we want to know what's coming in the future, we're actually heading back to the moon. And so NASA's building something called the Space Launch System. It's an enormous rocket, and it is built to take us back to the moon. Let's see, this rocket is 111 meters tall and can do the work of 16 Soyuz rockets of getting things into space. So it's a really big rocket. This is the capsule that it carries. It's called Orion capsule. Orion's built to carry 4 astronauts to space. We're going to be flying it for the first time next year with no astronauts on it. And then not too long after that, we'll be sending humans on a test flight out around the moon. And then the goal of NASA is to get to the surface of the moon by 2024. This is what one of the solid rocket boosters looks like from the side. And this is what those boosters look like when they're firing. This is a very, very powerful rocket. And it has 2 of these boosters on it. And all of this is part of a program called Artemis. And part of that is something called Gateway. It's what you're seeing in front of you right now. Canada committed to building a new generation of space robotics to support Gateway. And Gateway is just that. It is basically a destination around the moon in lunar orbit that you go to, sort of like going to an airport hub. And then you can go down to the lunar surface from there. You can park your lunar lander there and refuel it. You can do science there. You can do observations, like astronomy observations from there. You can do all sorts of cool things and eventually use it as a leaping off platform to go to Mars. And so we're working really hard at the Canadian Space Agency right now on developing this 3rd generation of space robotics that can, right now we're good at doing robotics in low Earth orbit, but we need to get good at doing robotics in deep space where it takes a long time to communicate with those machines. So some neat work going on there. And then this is what the lunar landers that have just been contracted by NASA. There's 3 of them that are competing to take humans back to the moon. So this one from Blue Origin, this one from Dynetics. You can see they all look very different. And this one from SpaceX called Starship. And they've actually started building a test version of this. So this isn't what it'll actually look like, but they're going to fly this one and do some testing because they want it to be able to land vertically like the Falcon 9. And so this is what that test version looks like. It's also a huge rocket. This one is 120 meters tall, so it'd be the tallest of all ones we've spoken of today, and it can do the work of 12 Soyuz. So not as much as that SLS rocket, which was 16 Soyuz worth of work, but still a very enormous rocket. And this one is meant to be reusable, which is pretty neat. And that wraps up our discussion on rockets. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys for some questions, but I just want to remind you that, that what drives us, so the Canadian Space Agency, to pursue space exploration is where we believe that space and the challenge of space and working together as an international community can bring back some enormous benefits to us back on the planet. And that's what drives us in that endeavor. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'll go back over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy. I just want to point out that even just rewatching those rocket boosters land, I could see the smile start to creep on your face as you watch them again. And I was like, I'm still smiling as well. I'm still getting goosebumps here because it's straight out of science fiction. And all of a sudden we saw the reality of it. And when you're talking about some of these future rockets, do you ever picture yourself sort of like, that could be me at some point? Do you ever does that ever dawn on you when you're like looking at drawings and like think that at some point there may be a picture and there may be a picture of you in there on these drawings?
Yeah, absolutely. That's my job. I'm super excited to fly on any of these vehicles. I just had this spirit of exploration inside of me for a long time. I'm fascinated by space. I love the challenge of space. I just love the team of people I work with. Astronauts, are definitely, they show up a lot more in the media about space, but man, the team that we have that makes space possible, they're just incredible people to work with. Canadian Space Agency doing some incredible stuff. And so in our international partnership, I just can't say enough about it. I mean, we get so much more done by working together. And I think we just are setting an enormous example of what this planet is really capable of. We've done some of the most challenging things humans have ever done. And we haven't done it as like one nation. We've done it by working together. And I think that's the way of the future.
Awesome. Well said. Speaking of working together, Rachel, did you want to jump in? I'll give you the second question before we get into all of our YouTube questions.
Yeah, I'd love to. So you touched on this a little bit, Michael, but talking about getting that goosebump feeling watching these launches. And we just recently had the Falcon 9 launch where we had the commercial Crew Dragon. And I wanted to ask, what did watching that launch mean to you? Because I know for me, I was like, just so anxious and nervous, I guess, watching and just wanting everything to go smoothly. And I just wanted to know what that meant to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are two of my friends on that rocket, so it's very personal for me. I know them, I know their family, I know their kids, and so it's anytime I see a colleague get on a rocket, I'm nervous for them because I have a lot of faith in the system and the team. I know that we won't do anything rash or we won't take an unnecessary risk, but we also know there is a calculated risk of flying on a rocket, and it is a dangerous activity still today. And so I was definitely nervous for them. We had the first launch attempt on Wednesday, I think it was. I felt more nervous on Wednesday than I did on Saturday. I don't really know why. Is maybe because I practiced on Wednesday, watching it, or maybe it's because I didn't really think it was going to go on Saturday because the weather was not looking good. And then all of a sudden we were going. But overall, I was super excited, and I just thought it was a really amazing experience to watch my two friends go to space on a brand new vehicle.
I'm going to get to the question. I just want to jump in on something very quickly, Jeremy. So what would it feel like to maybe sit in Bob and Doug's shoes there on, say, like Wednesday when you're ready to go and then they're like, no, not going to happen. What sort of feelings and thoughts might be going through their minds, and sort of like you're ready to go, but then you can't, and then you got to do it all over again. Like maybe take us through what they might be feeling in that moment.
Yeah, I think, it kind of comes with the territory, and we all have experience with it on a kind of a less drama scale, if you will. Like flying, we do a lot of flight training as astronauts because flight training is very real. I mean, you can kill yourself in an airplane, and so you have to manage the risk. You have to make real decisions, and aviation is like that. You have to have that self-discipline all the time to be like, no, the weather isn't good enough today, we're not going. Or you're trying to get somewhere and you're like, we're just not going to get there today. And so we're kind of used to that. Although I will tell you, I mean, it's a much bigger deal to be on a rocket and get in your spacesuit and the rocket's fueled, and then to be like, we're not going, and you're like, shucks, that's too bad. I was really pumped to go. So I think it's always going to be hard to not go, but thank goodness we have the self-discipline to make those good decisions.
Absolutely. All right, let's get to everyone's questions here. And since we're sticking with the themes of rockets, we're going to get to the rocket questions first, and then we'll expand as we do in the universe. So our first question comes from Alex, 7 years old. How long does it take to build a rocket? And of course, that would be very general question. Like in general, how long do you think it would take, Jeremy?
Yeah, like if you've already kind of proven your rocket and you need to build it, it probably takes about a year from start to finish to build a rocket from scratch. I mean, that's just a real ballpark. But often it takes many years, like even 5 to 10 years to develop a new rocket, because what happens is it's really challenging. And you'll be going along with your plan and you think you had a good plan, and then you'll find a reason why it's not a good plan, and you'll have to make an adjustment to your rocket design or your capsule design. Once you get into testing it, you realize, oh no, this isn't going to work as well as I thought. And so that's kind of the neat thing about space, is it's always going to test your resilience. So this is important for you in your life too. You will be tested in life, and sometimes when you're going after a goal, you're gonna meet with some resistance, or you're gonna meet with some failure. And in the space program, we have a great quote from the Apollo 13 movie, but it was, failure is not an option. And that's kind of how you got to look at it in life. It's like, it's okay to fail, but it's not okay to stay there. Then you got to pick yourself back up and keep going. And that's what it's like building a rocket. It's not easy.
Wow, great answer. Speaking of the Falcon 9s, Evandro has a question about how many times they could be reused until they're taken out of service.
Yeah, I think, that's an evolving answer. So as I understand it, they have now flown one booster 5 times. The first ones they recovered, and maybe even the first one, they didn't even refly it because they learned things from it that they needed to change things to make it more reusable. So I think they're up to 5 times now, but I think in the future, as they've made those adjustments, I don't know what the final answer is, but I think probably 10 times or maybe more.
Okay, awesome. Let's take a step back for a minute. And before you became an astronaut candidate, you were a pilot. And of course, you flew planes. And we got a question here from Montgomery, question for Lieutenant Colonel Hansen. What was your favorite aircraft to fly during your time in the Royal Canadian Air Force? And can maybe talk a little bit about your time in the RCAF and how this has prepared you to be an astronaut.
Yeah, I started my Air Force career pretty young by joining the Air Cadet program in Canada, and the Air Cadets taught me to fly. And it was really Air Cadets that shaped me and prepared me to join the Royal Canadian Air Force, because I was pretty shy. And so I joined the program at 12. They kind of taught me how to be a leader. They taught me about self-confidence, being a good Canadian citizen. And then eventually, after I worked hard enough, I was able to get a glider pilot license, a private pilot license. And then I went through the RCAF pilot training, and I ultimately ended up flying CF-18 fighter jets, and that would be my favorite airplane. I have the most time in that airplane. It's a really amazing aircraft. I've done some just really cool and challenging things on the airplane, and it's really like the freedom of flight. Like, you have so much power in a CF-18. I mean, you can just do things you can't imagine in an airplane, which I just found to be a real treat. So I don't know, like some of the neat things that had nothing to do with doing the job, but they're just a byproduct of being in the airplane and flying around, is like, if you're standing on the ground, you look up and you see like some really cool cloud formation, like way up there, like 30 or 40,000 feet. And F-18, you can just zip up there and check it out. And that's pretty cool. You can go straight up, straight down, supersonic, low to the ground, or really high. I just thought that was a unique experience.
Oh, wow. And then at some point, how did because not every pilot, transitions into being a potential astronaut candidate. So at what point did you decide that you wanted to make this part of your career?
Yeah, realistically, I started the bug really young when I was, the age of the people asking these questions today. I saw a photo of astronauts standing on the moon, and that was like, that's crazy. I just couldn't believe that people had actually left Earth, gone to the moon, and come back, and there were footprints right where I was looking up at the moon. That just really threw a switch in my head. And so I realized I wanted to be a space explorer, and then I realized I could be a space explorer by becoming a pilot. And so I always had it in the back of my mind that I would try to be an astronaut. I would try to go to space. And I'm, essentially I'm still trying. I mean, I'm very lucky. As long as my medical holds, I will be the next Canadian to fly in space. I'm pretty fortunate that way. But you just never know for sure. And so going through as a pilot in the Air Force, it was really just a matter of applying when the Canadian Space Agency said they were looking for new astronauts. And I should tell you this, I mean, if Canada needed to find 100 astronauts, do you think they could? Of course they could. I mean, we have tons of people in Canada who could do this job. So you have to arrive with the right skill sets and background and experiences, which I worked for and I had, but a whole bunch of people had those. So in the end, I kind of feel like I won a bit of a lottery getting the opportunity to fly in space. But I think what's also neat for young people to consider today is that is changing. I mean, what I hope you got from my presentation is that space is opening up. Opportunities are coming, and they're coming fast, and there are going to be way more people flying in space in the future. And even in Canada, we're going to have way more astronauts, and we're probably going to have government astronauts in the future like we do today, but we're probably going to have private astronauts as well. And so that's super cool.
Do you hear that, Rachel? Or are you ready to be sent up into space?
Absolutely, but I'm wondering when you think that how close are we to affordable commercial crew flights? Because I know that you're talking about how we're going through all this testing to eventually bring regular folk like me and like Michael up into space. So how close do you think we are to that?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of affordable. I think right now, people that want to go up to space station, I think, they're probably paying something like 40, 50 million, something like that, if they wanted to go today. If you wanted to ride on some of those rockets that I told you, they just go up and they fall back down, and you're in space for about 15 minutes. I think that's going to be on the order of $200,000. So I wouldn't say that it's really affordable yet, but I would say, the decade after this one, I think we'll see it open up. I think only very, very rich people will be able to afford it this decade. But next decade, I think we will have learned a lot. There'll be a lot more competition in the market, and everybody's goal is to drive the cost down. So I think it might be affordable in, say, 15, 20 years.
All right. Well, you're probably better set up for that, Rachel, because you're a lot younger than I am. So let's go back to the chat. Speaking of inspiring young people to space, Connor is from Calgary, and he's applying for Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama next summer. So his question is, when do you think humans will go to Mars?
Yeah, I love that you're going to Space Camp. That's a pretty cool opportunity, or you're going to try to go anyway. It's hard to predict Mars, but we sort of think of Mars as the late 2030s, so like 2040 time frame. So I would say kind of 20 years is when I would realistically expect the first humans to walk on Mars. I'll tell you this today. I mean, we have the technology to do it now, but it would be very expensive. And so the plan that we have is to reduce the cost and make space more reusable, like you saw with those rockets landing and being reused. The Gateway program I told you about around the moon, that space station around the moon, it is all about creating a reusable transportation infrastructure. Think of it as building a railway across Canada, for example, to open up the country and to make moving things around cheaper. That is what we're doing right now. We're kind of building the railway system for space, so that going to Mars can become affordable, and so that these benefits that we're bringing back to humanity aren't costing us too much money, because we understand that space is bringing benefits, but it's not the number one priority of governments or people on the planet. I mean, most important is we got to take care of our planet. We got to take care of the people on it. Those are the most important things we have to do. But we recognize that investing a little bit of money in space allows us to seek out those benefits and to help us with technology in the future. So give us 20 years. How about that?
Okay. Well, if Connor is only 7, then he might be the right age, to be that astronaut if space camp goes well.
Absolutely the right age.
And speaking of, I think like maybe perhaps one of the biggest challenges for humans going to Mars will be this challenge of our health. Because as you say, going up to the International Space Station, what's that, about like a less than a day trip to get up to the International Space Station. The moon, that's about what, 3 days maybe? Mars is going to be a lot longer than that. And that picture that you showed us of the Soyuz rocket, I don't know if I would last longer than 15 minutes in that cramped space, let alone 8 months. So what do you think of some of the challenges of our health, humans going that far in space?
Yeah, there are some big challenges. Let's start with this conversation first. So, today, if we were to create a spacecraft and to go to Mars, it would probably be a 2.5-year mission, because with the types of engines we have today, it would be about 8 months to get to Mars. And then you have to, if you want to stay on the surface at all for any length of period or any length of time, then you have to basically stay there for about a year while the planets line up again. And then you can start on your way back. So it's about another 8 months to come home. So it's about a 2.5-year trip to Mars. There's some really neat engine technology that's being developed. There's one of them that I'm fairly familiar with called the Vasimir engine by Ad Astra, and it's working in a lab here in Houston actually. And eventually they're going to test it in space. But so far it looks very promising. And if an engine like that worked and we had enough power, we could take the trip from 8 months down to 40 days. And that would significantly change everything that I'm about to mention. So, right now, if you're on an 8-month trip to Mars, you're in a high radiation environment during that whole time. We're protected on this Earth by our magnetic field around the planet, and it protects us from radiation. But once you get outside of it, even on the space station, it's higher radiation than you and I have on the Earth, but it's still protected by the Earth's magnetic field. Once you get beyond that and you're on your way to Mars, you're going to be getting heavy doses of radiation. So we either have to build our spaceship to protect the astronauts, which typically will increase the mass of the spacecraft, so that makes it expensive, or they're just going to get a high dose. So that's a problem we have to think about. Here's another one that's really good for all of us to consider is the idea of, like, let's say it's a team of 6. So right now we put people on the space station in a tin can for about 6 months. And there's quite a bit of room on the space station. A spacecraft going to Mars is going to be quite a bit smaller, probably. It will be a lot smaller than the space station. So you have people in close quarters. They have to really work together well as a team. So when we recruit astronauts, we're interested in their abilities, their academic background, their ability to do operational type tasks like, manage risk and things like that. But we're also very, very interested in whether they're a team player or not. And so, like, if space exploration is something that interests you, you should be giving some thought to, how do I really work in a team? And do I have empathy? Like, do I think about how the other person feels in this conversation? And these are things that you develop your whole life. I'm still working on them. I'm still trying to, be a better team player, listening to other people, and making sure that I understand when I'm negatively affecting them, and I'm inviting them to tell me about when I make them feel bad so that we can fix it and improve our relationship. These are really important skills for all of us here on planet Earth, but definitely for astronauts in space.
That's a really wonderful perspective, Jeremy. And I'm even thinking now, just in terms of the health aspect for astronauts that have been to the International Space Station and coming back, because you are a candidate, and that could be you at some point, and their health kind of impacts your health in some way, because you're learning about how space is impacting them. Do you find that now that you are, as an astronaut candidate, are you more in tune, more sort of like empathetic, that team player, that kind of what's happened to them is going to happen to you as well, and it's important to be more connected to them in that way?
Yeah, very much. I mean, we actually spend quite a bit of effort as an international astronaut corps talking about these things and learning to work together, putting ourselves in challenging situations as a team, and then not just doing the challenging thing, but actually then turning around and debriefing or discussing how we did as a team. So I'll give you an example. So I lived on the ocean floor in this habitat. It's kind of like living in a space station on the ocean floor. I lived down there for 7 days. There were 6 of us down there, and we were doing testing about what it would be like to do research on Mars, and with a time delay. Because if you were on Mars right now, Michael, and I was back here on Earth, it would take at least 5 minutes for my transmission to get to you, maybe 20 minutes, depending on where our 2 planets are. And so it's difficult to communicate over those vast distances. So we were doing testing about that. But on top of just doing the testing, and living in a stressful environment, we were very much working on our ability to work as a team and to have that empathy. So this is something we take pretty seriously, and we do put a lot of effort into, and we know each other very well before we go to space.
Rachel, you had a question?
I did, yeah. So speaking of going back to the moon and then eventually going to Mars, I'm wondering if we had the technology, let's say that we had faster than light travel or warp drive or something like that they have in sci-fi, if there was a moon or a planet or even an exoplanet or an exosystem that you would want to visit.
Oh, I mean, I have to pick one. We are very much focused on Mars. But, I'm really bought into the science of Mars. I think, there's a very interesting story there for us. It's like a time capsule. We understand now that Mars used to be much more like planet Earth. It used to have a thicker atmosphere. It used to have water on the surface. What happened to Mars, and what can that teach us about what could happen to Earth? I think this is a very important, piece of the puzzle for us, something that can show us just how much damage or how much a planet can change. And we as humans, what our impact on it is. I think there's a lot to learn there. And so I would like to go check out Mars. When you see pictures of Mars, like when I look at Curiosity rover and its photos on Mars, I'm like, I could imagine exploring that place. I've been to some cool places on planet Earth that remind me of Mars, like Drumheller in Alberta, for example, reminds me of some of the pictures on Mars. Like I could totally get into exploring Mars and trying to unravel that mystery.
How's your Matt Damon impression?
Yeah, hopefully I wouldn't be in his situation. That one was pretty rough.
Speaking of someplace which maybe you might go to one day, Connor wants to know about the Artemis space station and how it's going to be launched, because obviously I don't think we can just launch it all in one piece. So could you maybe talk about how Artemis is going to get up there?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not going to be launched as one piece. And I think it's evolving. That story is evolving. So originally it was all going to be launched on SLS rockets. I think it could end up being a mix of SLS rockets and some of these other commercial rockets that we see in development, like the Falcon Heavy, for example, or the Blue Origin New Glenn rocket that I showed you. I mean, and any of these vehicles could be Atlas vehicle, could be launching pieces of this, and then we will build it out by the moon. So it's just like we did the International Space Station. We took it up one big piece at a time and then put it together. And we'll do the same thing for Gateway. But Gateway is much, much smaller than the International Space Station. So it won't be nearly as many pieces.
Right. Another question came in from Charlie from Park Hill, Ontario. Wow, we got a Canada-wide audience. This is amazing. This is what happens, for us as a space center. We normally are focused in on our Vancouver audience, but now we're Canada-wide. We're worldwide now. This is a great opportunity to be more global and to think about our audience in a more global way. But Charlie wants to know about listening to music in your spacesuits. Or maybe just talk about maybe, are you always chattering with people, talking with people, or can you just, I know Rachel likes to listen to music when she's working, and I like to as well. And I can imagine maybe astronauts might like that sort of space just to kind of do some work and listen to music. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, great question, because it is a little bit different in space. I don't know if Charlie knows that, but I grew up like 15 minutes from Park Hill. So that's like my town area. I grew up on a farm by Elsa Craig. Anyway, one thing to know about, like, let's say we're on the International Space Station. The one thing to know about a space station like that is it's kind of like living inside a computer. So, like when your laptop's working hard and you hear that hum of the fans, there's so many computers on board the International Space Station doing different tasks that there's a lot of noise, and there's this constant background noise. So it's never quiet on the International Space Station. And you probably wouldn't enjoy like just having a speaker, like a Bluetooth speaker sitting, or not sitting, but floating in there playing music because of all the other ambient noise. So what astronauts do is they wear headsets, noise canceling headsets if they want to listen to music. And yeah, absolutely. Everybody that I know of anyway, all my friends, I mean, they definitely take music to space with them to listen. It's important that you have time, hanging out with your colleagues on the space station. It's also important you take some self-reflection time and some time to relax and think. And so music is a great way to do that. The other thing is astronauts spend about 2 hours of every day working out, exercising in space, because you're floating all the time. You're not using your muscles or your bones, and it's not good for your muscles and bones to be like that. And so exercising is very, very important. And so music while you exercise is just, for me anyway, I really enjoy listening to music while I exercise. So I'll be doing that on space station as well.
So what's going to be your go-to? What does Jeremy Hansen have on his iPod that he takes up to, not iPod, but anymore, but.
Probably, I'm not an audiophile, but I have some classics that I really, really like. One of them is Tragically Hip, which is a great Canadian band. Another one is U2. Those are probably my go-tos if I was
classic rock. I love it. Rachel, what about you? What would you play if you were on the International Space Station?
There is an album called Voyager 1 by Adam Young, and it's all the tracks on it are named after different places in space. So I'd probably listen to that.
I think for myself, I think it would be very hard not to listen to some Bowie if I was up there. Maybe even Chris Hadfield's cover as well. So we just got a few more minutes left with you, Jeremy. Let's maybe do one more question. Back to Connor. Oh, this is a great question. How are rockets transported to their launch sites? Because obviously they don't build them there, and they are pretty big. You saw gave us a picture of them in that big hangar there. So how do they get them actually to the launch site?
Yeah, different people have different solutions. Like the Falcon 9 rocket that I showed you, they actually lay it down. Same with the Soyuz rocket. It's laid down in the building while they're building it. And then they roll it out on wheels or on a track. For the Soyuz, it's like a train track. They roll it out and then they stand it up like that. But they do build it very close to the launch pad. So you do build it where you launch it from, but it's maybe 500 meters, a kilometer from the launch pad is where you're building your rocket. Another one like that SLS, that huge rocket we're building, we're using the same facilities that we had for the Apollo Saturn V rocket when we went to the moon the first time. And it's an enormous building, a really tall building, and they build the rocket standing up. And then they have this mobile transporter that picks up the whole rocket on its launch pad basically and rolls that whole launch pad out to the site where it launches from. And it's actually really far from the launch pad. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's kilometers away, like maybe 3-4 kilometers away. It takes like a whole day to roll it out to the pad.
What a task for someone to take their whole day just driving the rocket there. It'd be a pretty important task for that driver.
It is, yeah. It's really slow. Like you can walk as fast as it's moving for sure. And people are walking beside it, monitoring things and making sure that it doesn't fall over.
Yeah, make sure that there's any traffic in the way as it's getting there.
That's right.
Well, I think we're going to end it there, Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining us. Be safe down there in Texas. Hopefully, we will see you up in space at some point in your future. We're really looking forward to seeing the Canadian flag back in space again. For Rachel and I, we're going to be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. Next week's theme is asteroids. Next Wednesday is also Canada Day. I don't know if you'll be able to celebrate down there in Houston, Jeremy, but happy pre-Canada Day to you. And for everyone out there, be safe. We will see you next Thursday.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. Definitely happy Canada Day. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.